My sister forced me to kneel before 300 guests just because I broke a glass, so I quietly set a trap that turned her perfect wedding into ruins. Hi, my name's Avira, and I was told to kneel at my sister's wedding because I broke a glass. But it wasn't about the glass. It was never about the glass. It was about years of being invisible, about sending money to help mom while they spent it on designer gowns. About planning a wedding I wasn't invited to speak at. And when I finally walked away quietly without a scene, the entire thing collapsed. But here's the thing. Was it really a collapse? Or had it been rotting long before the violin ever played? Would you stay if your own family treated you like background noise at your sister's big day? Would you kneel, or would you walk out, too? I didn't even feel the glass slip. 1 second, I was adjusting a napkin that wouldn't lie flat, and the next, crystal splintered against stone, shattering into 1,000 quiet accusations. It echoed louder than it should have. Everything froze. The clinking of forks, the soft hum of conversation, the pianist rehearsing in the corner, all silenced. I stood there, fingers still curled around the napkin as the room turned toward me. Avira. Callista's voice cracked through the hush, sharp and practiced like a stage actor trained to command silence. Her wedding gown shimmered beneath the garden lights, a curated vision of southern elegance. She looked perfect until she opened her mouth again. Kneel and apologize right now, she hissed. Or get out, gasps fluttered through the guests. I could feel them judging, whispering, eyes flickering from her to me. I glanced toward our mother, seated just a few feet from the head table. She didn't speak, didn't gesture. She lowered her eyes and smoothed her dress like it had wrinkles to fix instead of a daughter to defend. I didn't move. I didn't kneel. My body locked up the way it always had when shame licked down my spine. Quiet, burning, but never enough to collapse me. For a brief moment, I thought someone might speak. Elijah, the wedding planner, our history aside, surely he wouldn't stand for this. But he looked away, too polished, too quiet like everyone else. I bent slightly only to gather the broken shards. A sharp edge nicked my palm, and I barely blinked. I folded the glass pieces into a linen napkin. Careful, deliberate. Then I walked over to the closest side table, laid it down, and turned back toward the crowd. My chair was empty, of course. There had never been a place card for me. Earlier, I'd circled the guest board looking for my name. A server finally whispered, "I think you're an overflow, miss." I'd smiled then, told myself it didn't matter, but it did. I slipped my purse strap over my shoulder and began walking down the aisle. Not the one lined with petals for Callista, but the narrow pathway behind the catering tent that led to the main gate. Heels on stone. My mother didn't follow. Callista didn't stop me. One of the guests whispered, "Did she just leave?" And still, no one moved. Let them watch. Let them remember how silence could stand taller than any scream. Flashbacks came uninvited, as they always do in moments like this. Me at 13 holding Callista's bouquet for her high school prom photo because she didn't trust anyone else to handle it right. Me at 20 wiring money home while she was on vacation in Cancun. Me at 27 organizing mom's medications during her recovery while Callista live-streamed her makeup line launch. Always just behind the camera, always holding things for someone else. As I stepped off the porch, the air hit different, cooler, sharper. Savannah nights had that way about them, like they knew secrets and weren't afraid to whisper them straight into your skin. I walked the path slowly, careful not to trip. My heart beat steady. No drama, no shaking, just done. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not here. Not in a place that demanded kneeling as the price of staying. What haunted me most wasn't Callista's voice. It was the lack of anyone else's. No one had said my name. No one had asked if I was okay. They just watched like a show, like I'd been cast as the misstep in their perfect tableau. Halfway down the gravel drive, I heard footsteps. For a second, I thought maybe someone came. Maybe someone cared enough to, but it was just a groomsman scurrying back toward the reception, talking into a headset. Not for me. Never for me. I walked until the music faded into the wind, until the estate lights were nothing but a shimmer on the horizon. And still no one called my name. They wouldn't have said it right anyway. I kept walking past the hedges trimmed within an inch of their lives, past the stone cherub fountain where Callista once posed for her college graduation photos, and down the driveway lined with fairy lights. My car wasn't parked at the main lot. Of course not. Overflow guests didn't get valet service. I found it tucked behind a row of catering vans, dust-covered from the dirt road, and boxed in by folding chairs that someone had clearly forgotten to stack properly. I sat inside for a while, engine off, windows cracked. The late afternoon sun hung low, bleeding gold over the estate. Somewhere inside, the music had resumed. I could hear the cello, slow and sweeping, probably trying to patch the mood I'd ripped open. That glass, it wasn't just an accident. It was the last sound before the illusion broke. But the illusion had started unraveling long before the glass shattered. Weeks earlier, when Callista's invitation arrived, I'd been sitting at my kitchen table, peeling a boiled egg, and sorting out rent receipts. The envelope was thick, cream-colored with gold lettering. Custom work, no doubt. I opened it, half expecting to find some over-the-top calligraphy scrawling my name with her usual flair. Instead, it read to Ava Thomas, guest. Guest, not Avira Thames, not sister of the bride. Just a name that didn't belong to me, paired with a title that said everything about how little I mattered. I remember texting her gently because you learned to ask Callista questions gently. I sent a photo of the card, added a laughing emoji to soften it. She replied 2 hours later, silly printer error. You know I'd never get your name wrong. It wasn't the first time. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Callista had perfected the art of making you feel unimportant while smiling through it. A missing name here. A forgotten birthday there. Little things that stacked up quietly like dust in corners no one bothers to clean. Still, I helped. I always did. When she asked me to come a day early to help with the rehearsal dinner, I said yes. When she asked if I could just swing by the florist to confirm the delivery, I said yes. When she asked if I'd mind helping her fiancé's mother write her toast because you're such a good writer, I said yes. Helping had become my second skin. That morning, the seating chart had been posted outside the tent, a giant gold frame propped on an easel. Guests crowded around, pointing, laughing, sipping their pre-ceremony champagne. I scanned the names once, twice, nothing. I pulled aside a teenage server, whispering, "Hey, can you help me find Thames?" She glanced over, confused, then shrugged. "Oh, I think you're an overflow. Probably the back garden seats." No table assignment. I smiled then. I always smiled. Of course. Thank you. That afternoon, while helping Callista with her makeup prep, she asked if I was still planning to say a few words during the toasts. Just something short, she said, brushing blush across her cheekbone. You've always known how to make people cry in the good way. I'd prepared a short speech, light, sincere, about growing up in a house with a sister who could charm the wind and how proud I was to see her build this life. I'd planned to close with a line about grace and forgiveness, something she always wanted to believe she embodied. But when the final printed program was handed to guests just an hour before the ceremony, my name wasn't listed anywhere. Not under speakers, not under family, not even under special thanks. I found her near the mirror wall pinning her veil. "Hey, quick question," I said, my voice casual. "Did the speech slot get cut?" She didn't even look up. Things changed. We needed to make space. It's not personal. Not personal. That's what people say when they want to stab you and not be blamed for the bleeding. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I nodded, turned away, and told myself it was just another oversight. But as I sat outside that evening, back against a bench near the estate's fountain, it all felt intentional. The misspelled name, the missing chair, the speech she promised and took away. I wasn't just excluded. I was being erased like a typo someone kept forgetting to fix because the story looked better without me in it. A bridesmaid wandered by then, wine glass in hand. She was the kind that always smiled like a magazine cover. Wide, polished, too much teeth. Hey, she said, sorry about what happened in there. Honestly, Callista just didn't want too many people speaking. She redid all the speeches herself. Wanted to keep the tone upbeat, you know. Upbeat, I repeated flat. Yeah. She said, yours might be a little heavy. Her voice rose at the end like a question she didn't want answered. I nodded, eyes fixed on the water. The fountain gurgled like it was laughing at me. Anyway, she continued, backing away. You still look amazing. That dress is killer. She left before I could reply. I sat a while longer until the air shifted and dusk rolled in. Somewhere behind the walls of that estate, they were serving dinner. Toasting a future built on curated memories, laughing over rewritten history. I didn't just feel forgotten. I felt erased. The next evening, long before the glass and the spotlight and that command to kneel, I'd sat at the edge of a long banquet table during the rehearsal dinner, sandwiched between two floral arrangements so tall I could barely see the person across from me. Maybe that was the point. The kind of visual metaphor no one admits, but everyone understands. The dining hall of the estate was glowing, candlelight flickering against polished silver, laughter bouncing off vaulted ceilings. The center of the room belonged to Callista. Of course, her laughter rang a little louder. Her hair had been redone mid-dinner because the first updo wasn't giving ceremony ready. People orbited around her like she was the sun. And I was the place card they almost forgot to print. Dinner plates were cleared and dessert, some kind of delicate panna cotta in crystal cups, had just been served when the projector was wheeled in. A server dimmed the lights and the screen lit up with the title, The Journey of Us. I recognized the font. I had shown her that typeface when we were teenagers, flipping through bridal magazines, dreaming of a wedding that would never be mine. Slide after slide glided across the screen. There was Callista helping Mom fold laundry. Callista holding me as a toddler in a frame labeled Protector from the start. Callista winning the county fair speech contest. Callista in her college cap and gown. At one point, I appeared in a group photo from elementary school, blurred in the background. Not a single image of me solo. Not one from when I worked 3 jobs in high school so she could quit band camp and focus on her pageant. Nothing from when I paid the electric bill the year Dad died and Mom forgot. No mention of the countless nights I stayed up editing Callista's business proposals while she drank wine and claimed collaboration. It was a history book rewritten by the winner. Every time someone at the table laughed or clapped at a sweet memory, my stomach pulled tighter. I wanted to stand up and say that story, I lived it, too, just from behind the curtain. But I didn't because what would that sound like? Bitterness in the middle of whipped cream and candlelight. Toward the end, a family friend, Mr. Merriman, an old neighbor with a belly like a barrel and a voice that carried, stood up to toast. He lifted his glass and said, Callista has always carried this family. Even when she was young, she had the shoulders for it. The applause that followed echoed longer than it should have. No one noticed me push my chair back. No one asked where I was going. I didn't even go far. I just stepped outside to breathe air that didn't reek of revisionist fiction. The porch was cooler, quieter. I leaned against the railing and stared at the garden lights, blinking like lazy stars across the lawn. My hands were cold. I didn't even bring a jacket. I had been too busy helping Callista steam hers. The door creaked softly behind me. For a second, I braced for her voice. Maybe some sweet backhanded apology. But it wasn't Callista. It was Letty, my grandmother. She stepped beside me slowly. Her steps had grown uncertain this past year, but her gaze hadn't lost an inch of sharpness. Quite a story in there, she said, eyes fixed on the same blinking lights, though it felt more like a fairy tale than a memory. I didn't answer. After a pause, she added, funny how memory works in this family. It always favors the loud. Still, I said nothing. Words were coiled too tight in my chest to come out straight. I remember you, she said finally. When your mom got sick and Callista couldn't deal with the hospital smell, you were the one who kept the schedule, drove her, sat through the scans, no camera, no audience, just you and your planner and that old blue hoodie you wore every day. I swallowed hard, not out of weakness, but because truth sometimes scratches your throat on its way out. She patted my hand, her skin dry and warm. They forget because it's easier. But you don't have to pretend you weren't there just because they won't name you. I turned to look at her. It doesn't matter, right? That's what we tell ourselves. Letty's eyes met mine. No, baby, it does. It matters because the story becomes real when enough people retell it wrong. The door opened again behind us, louder this time. Laughter spilled out. The kind that didn't make it to your bones. Letty didn't flinch. You've always held everything up, Avira, she said quietly. They just built their stories on your silence. I didn't cry. I didn't go back inside either. I stood with her a little longer, letting that night air wrap around me, not to warm me, but to remind me what it felt like to breathe without shrinking. By the time the sun began its slow descent behind the estate's hedges, painting everything in a gold-tinged hush, I had managed to fold 53 chairs. My arms ached, and my fingers smelled faintly of gardenia and lemon polish. We had just finished wrapping up the final touches after the rehearsal dinner. Napkins collected, candles extinguished, dessert crumbs swept into silver trays. Most of the bridal party had scattered to their rooms or corners of the estate where late-night laughter was already starting to brew. I was heading toward the storage shed with the last load when she caught me. Lauren, Callista's best friend since high school, the kind who always laughed louder than she needed to and remembered all her petty victories like they were published memoirs. She was already tipsy, holding a glass of something white and expensive, teetering slightly in heels too high for gravel. V. She sang out, using a nickname I'd stopped answering to years ago. Hey, wait up. I stopped, not because I wanted to, but because it wasn't worth the effort to keep walking. She leaned in close, alcohol and hairspray in her breath, and giggled like she'd just tripped over a secret. Callie told me something funny, she said, voice lowered as if the wind might gossip. She said, this whole wedding, it was her way of reminding you where you stood. My hands tightened around the folding chair I held. She said you needed a little perspective, you know, since you've always been kind of, not great at staying in your lane. She winked. Guess this was her chance to teach you something. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, turned back toward the shed, and kept walking. But inside, something dropped. The kind of drop you feel in your stomach when the mask falls off someone you thought you knew, even when you already knew better. She hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't overlooked me. She had planned this. That knowledge landed heavier than the chair in my hands. It hit even harder a few hours later as I stood by the floral arch Callista would walk under the next day. The florists had gone and the string lights were dimmed. I was there to check for wind damage per her request. Always one more task for the person least seen, and that's when I saw him. Elijah. He was adjusting a cluster of orchids on the left pillar, his back half turned. When he noticed me, he stiffened slightly, then slowly straightened. His mouth opened, then closed again. We stood in silence. The last time I saw him, he'd been holding a box of books and saying he needed space. 2 weeks later, he showed up on Callista's Instagram feed, shirtless, suntanned, and already branded as someone special. Hi, he said finally. I didn't respond. There was nothing left in that hello for me to meet. He cleared his throat. Didn't expect to see you here tonight. You mean here under a structure I helped design? I asked calmly. He winced. I didn't know you were involved. Of course you didn't. That's how it always goes with you. He glanced away. This isn't what it looks like. I smiled. No, Elijah. It's exactly what it looks like. I didn't wait for an answer. I stepped past him, adjusted the draping on the arch, and walked away. The heat in my chest wasn't rage. It was memory turning sharp. Finally waking up. Later that night, I found Callista alone in the prep tent, brushing through the final outfit lineup with 2 stylists. When they left, I didn't give her time to breathe before I asked it. Is there anything you haven't tried to take from me? She turned slowly, one brow slightly lifted. Oh, come on. Are we really doing this now? I need an answer. She laughed once, dry. You gave it all up the moment you stayed quiet, Avira. For years, you practically handed me the script. I stared at her, letting the truth of it settle. She wasn't ashamed. She was triumphant. that's your version? I asked. She crossed her arms. It's the only one that worked. Her words were like a door slamming shut. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I left the tent, walked down the sloping path past the gazebo and into the far corner of the estate where no one else would find me. And there, with the rustling oaks whispering over my head, I let myself feel it. Finally, the way everything she'd done now made sense. The misprinted name, the speech she cancelled, the missing photos. Elijah. It wasn't sloppiness. It wasn't circumstance. It was architecture. She had built a moment to stand above me and ensured I'd be on my knees or not at all. But I hadn't kneeled, and I wouldn't start now. I woke to the sound of soft knocking. Not urgent, not rushed, just a steady rhythm against the guest room door. I sat up slowly. The thin blanket on my bed had tangled around my legs, and the light filtering through the half-closed blinds told me it was still early, too early for ceremony chaos, but just late enough for tension to be brewing. Room service, came the muffled voice. I pulled on my robe and opened the door. A young server stood holding a tray with a single cup of coffee, a folded napkin, and a post-it note stuck under the saucer. The bride said to offer this to you before rehearsal starts. He mumbled, eyes darting between me and the floor. Also, they're asking if you've seen the florist. The payment's short. I blinked. What? The delivery team said they need the remaining balance before setup. They're waiting at the gate. I took the tray and thanked him, closing the door slowly. The room was quiet again, but the calm didn't reach me. The note under the cup was scrawled in Callista's handwriting, "Smile today. It's almost over." I sat at the edge of the bed, letting the steam from the coffee rise, willing it to anchor me. But something itched. The payment was short. That didn't track. I'd been told repeatedly that everything was prepaid, handled, perfect. The kind of perfection Callista controlled like a military strategist. I reached for my phone, found Mom's number, and hit dial. She picked up on the third ring. "Morning, honey." "Morning," I replied. "Quick thing. Didn't you say the florist deposit was covered?" A pause. "Well," she started slowly. "There was a bit of a mix-up. Callista needed to redirect some funds last week. She used some of yours, just temporarily." "Mine?" My voice stayed calm, but something cold settled into my stomach. "The account you set up for me, the one for medical costs and groceries. She needed help with vendor deposits. And you weren't touching that money for anything urgent. You mean the money I've been sending for 2 years?" I said, "To keep your lights on and your fridge full while I worked overtime." Silence. "She's your sister, Avira," she said finally, voice tight with justification. "She's getting married. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing." I stared at the wall across from me. The paint was peeling near the window, probably from humidity. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Somewhere outside, I could hear distant laughter from the patio. "You didn't think I deserved to be asked," I said, keeping my tone even. "I thought you'd understand," she snapped. "You always have." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. I sat for a long while after that, letting the betrayal crystallize into clarity. They hadn't just taken money. They'd taken something far more precious. My willingness to keep giving. I dressed deliberately that morning. Navy blue suit, low heels, pearl studs. The kind of outfit people associate with composure, not confrontation. I put on lipstick in front of the mirror, watching my face transform into something I could carry through a war zone. Then I walked downstairs. The estate buzzed with movement, caterers unloading trays, the string quartet rehearsing in the garden, guests sipping early champagne under parasols. I moved through it all like a ghost in daylight, unnoticed by most. Callista stood by the center fountain, surrounded by her bridesmaids. Her gown was hanging behind her in a garment bag, steaming slightly in the sun. She was laughing, always laughing, like nothing in this world had teeth. I passed close enough for her to see me, but not so close that she could stop me. She turned mid-laugh just as I walked by. "You might control the day, Callie," I said quietly, "but not the cost." She blinked, then smiled tight and practiced. "Don't start drama, Avira." You're too old for tantrums. I didn't stop walking. I found a corner near the back garden, far from the curated perfection, and stood under a sycamore tree. My fingers trembled only once before I opened the notes app on my phone and typed a single line. A name left off the list doesn't mean I don't exist. I saved it. I didn't need anyone else to read it. Letty found me there a few minutes later. She didn't say much, just stood beside me, both of us looking out over the lawn where rows of white chairs gleamed like teeth. You all right? She asked eventually. No, I said, but I'm awake. She nodded. They spent my love like it was spare change, I added softly, and wondered why I stopped offering more. She gave a faint smile, then looked out again. People like that don't realize when they borrow too deep, until they're bankrupt. I stayed there with her until the orchestra started tuning. It was nearly time. By the time the ceremony guests began arriving, I had already checked every corner of the estate grounds twice. Not because anyone asked me to, of course. Habit, I guess. My name wasn't on any schedule or clipboard, but that never stopped me from showing up. I stayed to the side as people filtered in. Women in long pastels with awkward fascinators. Men trying to hide their discomfort in rented suits. I recognized faces I hadn't seen in years. Cousins who hadn't returned calls. An old Sunday school teacher who used to tell me I was the quiet one. Everyone was here for the show. And Callista, as always, was the headliner. I found a quiet place behind the trellis arch to watch the final setup unfold. The cocktail bar stood under a cluster of oak trees, complete with custom signage that read, "Love on the Rocks." One of several clever names I'd brainstormed on a rainy afternoon months ago when Callista said she wanted Southern charm, but with an edge. She never mentioned it again after that. The floral arch was breathtaking. Lilies, eucalyptus, soft blush roses. The color palette, mine, the layout of the aisle, I'd sketched it on graph paper when she couldn't decide how many rows would fit without crowding the center. And yet, I was the only one standing still. Everyone else buzzed with purpose and credit. The DJ clicked on the mic before we begin. Just a quick shout out to our amazing wedding planner, Elijah Monroe, for designing every beautiful detail you're seeing today. Applause rippled through the crowd. I stood frozen, not clapping, not blinking. Callista turned toward the guests, her expression radiant. She knew what she was doing. Her gaze didn't reach me, but the corners of her mouth curled just enough to let me know. This was intentional. I felt my jaw tighten, my hand gripping the small program I'd been given at the entrance. Ironic considering I was left off most of it. I rolled it into a neat cylinder, trying to focus on the fact that breathing was still free. After the toast, I made my way toward the back tent. Elijah was checking floral notes on a clipboard when he saw me approaching. He didn't smile, just lowered the clipboard like someone caught in the wrong room. I didn't expect them to mention me, he said quickly. That was all, Callista. You didn't correct them. I wasn't going to interrupt a toast. Avira, you didn't correct them, I repeated slower. He rubbed the back of his neck. Look, I know it's messed up, but this day is already balancing on edge. I didn't want to make things worse. That's the problem, I said, voice steady. Silence doesn't keep things from getting worse. It just hides the cut until it bleeds out. His face flinched, but I was already turning away. I didn't storm. I didn't cry. I walked back through the garden, through the rows of chairs, now half filled with anticipation. The string quartet had started playing softly, something classical and forgettable. I made my way toward the altar, slow, deliberate. Callista hadn't come out yet. She was likely still being fluffed and powdered and prepared for her moment of glory. I stepped up to the arch, the centerpiece of the entire ceremony. It tilted slightly from the breeze. A single rose had come loose, its stem slipping between the latticework. I reached up and fixed it. No fanfare, no speech, just the quiet act of claiming the work I'd done, of refusing to let someone else's name be etched over mine. I stepped back, smoothed my dress, and met the eyes of a few seated guests. Some recognized me, some didn't. That was fine. I wasn't there to be remembered. I was there to be undeniable. Then I caught Callista watching me from behind the French doors. She had seen the moment. Just a rose, just a gesture. But she saw it, and her smile faltered. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't need a seat at the table. She knew. I returned to the edge of the gathering, tucked behind a marble column just wide enough to disappear behind. The ceremony was minutes from starting. Guests began taking their seats. Ushers whispered names and guided couples to rows. Photographers crouched near the aisle. I slipped away quietly. No one called after me. No one noticed. But the storm, as always, was already forming. I didn't even make it halfway to the refreshment table before a hand tugged lightly at my elbow. I turned, expecting one of the servers, or maybe a distant cousin, with questions about the seating. Instead, it was Belle, the youngest of Callista's bridesmaids, barely old enough to rent a car, but already too aware of every social cue to ignore something messy. She didn't speak right away, just extended her phone with a tight-lipped frown, eyes darting toward the lawn where guests were beginning to take their seats. What is this? I asked. She hesitated, then said, they're passing it around in one of the bridal party group chats. I figured you should see it before it gets to the uncles. On her screen was a screenshot of a text message supposedly from me. The name read Era Thames, and the message beneath it was damning, she stole my life. I'm not going to let her have this day without a price. It wasn't just petty. It was surgical. Precise enough to sound unhinged. Just enough to raise questions in a room full of whispers. My breath stayed even, but I felt the shift in my chest. The way your body knows it's under attack before your brain has caught up. I handed the phone back, nodded once. Thank you for not assuming. Belle swallowed, almost guilty. I don't believe it. If that means anything, it does. She moved away quickly, vanishing into the sea of chiffon and champagne. I stood rooted for a moment, then walked toward the inner courtyard where the hydrangeas bloomed in clusters against the stone wall. I needed shade. I needed to think. Instead, I found my mother. She was seated on a bench, adjusting the clasp on her handbag like it had personally offended her. I approached slowly, giving her space. She didn't look up. I assume you've seen it, I said. I have. I waited. After a long pause, she finally asked, did you send it? I looked at her fully now. You think I'd do that? She shrugged. You've always had a dramatic streak. A dramatic streak? That was what she called the years I stayed silent while holding this family together. When Callista bailed on Mom's hospital appointments, who sat there in the hard plastic chairs? When rent was late after Dad passed, who emptied her savings without asking for thanks? I stayed quiet to keep the peace, I said, my voice low. Not because I didn't notice. Mom pursed her lips. Well, it's Callista's day. I don't think you understand what that means to her. It seems like she's the only one whose feelings matter. You're making this about you again. She snapped, then stood up and walked away like she hadn't just carved something deep. I stared at the empty space she left behind and breathed through it. Elijah found me near the arbor, his hands shoved into his pockets like he was preparing for a confession he didn't quite believe in. I didn't know she'd go that far, he said. That message, I wouldn't have believed it came from you. I didn't bother with a reply. I could say something, he added. Tell people it's fake. I looked at him for a long time. You know what I need, Elijah? I need your silence to stop costing me. He looked away, jaw clenched. That was the end of our conversation. I didn't respond to the lies the way Callista expected. I didn't cry. I didn't grab a mic or demand a public correction. What I did instead was walk into the bridal suite where the final vendor files were kept and retrieve a folder I had brought days earlier because some part of me had known this would come. Inside were copies of the original floral sketches, the invoice receipts in my name, screenshots of text threads where I'd pitched half the ceremony ideas that were now being called Elijah's vision. I found 5 people I knew well, our Aunt Marlene, Pastor Evans, 2 old family friends, and Mrs. Langston, who taught Callista and me in 3rd grade. I handed each of them a folder, said nothing more than, for when the truth starts feeling like fiction. I watched their faces as they read, flipped pages, paused. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Guests who'd been clapping too loud stopped mid-sentence. 1 or 2 people who'd already posted glowing Instagram stories took them down. It was subtle, not a rebellion, just a quiet shift. The kind of change that happens when enough people start thinking, maybe we didn't see everything. Letty appeared beside me as the crowd began murmuring. She didn't ask what I'd done. She didn't need to. She just squeezed my hand and whispered, "They're scared of your truth. That's how you know it matters." And for the first time that day, I let myself feel it. Not anger, not pain, power. The violinist had just struck the first trembling note when I stood. I didn't hesitate. No glance over my shoulder. No dramatic pause for effect. Just the quiet scrape of my chair against stone and the slow, steady rhythm of my heels crossing the aisle, straight down the center, past the startled rows of guests, through the symmetry and perfection that had excluded me from the start. Someone behind me whispered my name. Another muttered, "Is she really?" But I didn't stop to correct their speculation. I walked right through it. Because for the first time in that family's carefully curated history, I didn't owe anyone a performance. The gravel cracked beneath my feet as I stepped through the wrought iron gate at the end of the lawn. The estate stood behind me like a portrait losing its frame. Meanwhile, inside, the script was cracking. I wasn't there to see it firsthand, but I heard later how it unfolded. Jonathan had been standing near the altar, watching the crowd shift. He'd been quiet all morning, more observant than joyful. A guest, one of the people I'd handed the folder to earlier, tapped his shoulder, handed him the papers, and whispered, "You should read this before you say I do." Jonathan didn't respond. He didn't ask questions. He just read. 2 pages in, he turned to Elijah. "Did you know about this?" Elijah nodded once, tight-lipped, and that was it. No fight, no theatrics, just a quiet man stepping up to a microphone moments before his bride was due to walk the aisle. The music stopped. Guests shifted, confused. Callista, in full veil and couture, had just emerged from the side hall. She caught sight of Jonathan, his expression unreadable, just as he said, voice calm but cutting, "I can't marry someone who humiliates her own sister to polish her own image." Gasps rippled like a wave. Callista froze. He didn't yell. He didn't point. He simply set the microphone down and walked away. Past stunned family. Past the coordinator waving her clipboard like a flag of surrender. Past Callista's mother clutching her pearls. He left. Callista stood at the front, veil trembling slightly in the breeze. A still life portrait of undone perfection. No one moved to her side, not even our mother. Elijah quietly packed up his binder. Didn't look back. I was by the river when Letty found me. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the water. I had taken my shoes off and stood barefoot in the soft grass, watching the current slip past as if it knew how to carry burdens better than I did. She didn't say anything at first, just walked up beside me. Her steps careful but determined. Then she handed me a small wooden box. "This belongs to you now," she said. I opened it. Inside was a single hairpin, gold, old, delicate. I remembered seeing it in photos of her mother, then her. A thing passed down not for glamour, but meaning. "It's not because you fought," Letty said, voice low. "It's because you refused to disappear." I swallowed, but the knot in my throat didn't move. Back at the estate, the chairs were already being unstacked. The caterers had begun loading trays back into vans. The DJ stood silent behind his console, uncertain whether to play anything at all. One of the bridesmaids was crying, not for Callista, but from sheer confusion. Someone whispered, this wasn't about love. It was about control, and control, when exposed, always unravels. I didn't return to the estate. There was nothing left for me there. Instead, I walked farther along the riverbank, hairpin in my palm, shoes dangling from my fingers. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing anyone, wasn't holding anything together. I was just walking forward. By the time I made it back up the hill, the sky had softened into that pale blue-gray that comes just before evening. The estate, once alive with orchestras and champagne flutes, had gone still. Folding chairs leaned at odd angles. Ribbons fluttered loose on table edges, and the floral arch that once stood with poise now listed slightly to one side, one corner drooping like a shoulder finally letting go. I didn't walk through it like I had before. I walked around, not because I feared anything inside, but because I didn't need to enter anymore. I had left the performance. What remained was cleanup, of truth, of ego, of illusion. Letty found me again, this time near the service driveway, where a line of vans idled as vendors packed up. She moved slower than before, but with that same deliberate steadiness. She didn't greet me with words. She just handed me a small envelope, creased, faded at the corners, the seal worn. "I found it in your father's dresser," she said quietly. "He wrote it a week before he passed. I wasn't sure when was the right time to give it to you until now." I nodded and took it. Later, back in the quiet of my apartment, the one-bedroom walk-up where I returned after the estate gates had shut behind me, I sat at my kitchen table, the letter resting between my palms. The kettle hissed softly behind me, but I didn't get up. I needed this moment more than I needed tea. His handwriting was shaky, but familiar, still curved the same way around the letter A of Ira. "If you're reading this, I guess I didn't get to say everything I should have. I saw more than you thought I did. I saw how much you carried. How often you let your sister shine while you stood behind her. Not because you lacked light, but because you believed in letting others feel seen. You did more than I ever asked of you. For your mother, for this family, for me. I'm sorry I didn't say this when it mattered. You deserved to hear it then. This family wouldn't have held without you, Dad." I pressed the letter to my chest for a long while. Not crying, not breaking, just holding. The pain didn't leave, but it changed. It stopped being a thing I had to carry alone. That night, after cleaning up the scattered programs and wiping down the last smudge of mascara from the bathroom mirror, I pulled a shoebox from my closet. Inside it were keepsakes I had forgotten I even kept. A ticket stub from Callista's high school play. A recipe card in Mom's handwriting. A photo of me and Dad at the lake, both sunburnt and smiling. I added 2 things. The hairpin Letty had given me. Once hers, once her mother's, now mine. And the letter. Neither needed a frame or fanfare, just space to exist. As I taped the box shut, I noticed the hem of the dress I had worn to the wedding. It hung near the closet, a small tear along the side where it had snagged on a thorny vine at the estate's edge. A fitting scar. It reminded me of the dress I had paid for. The one Callista cried about weeks before the wedding, claiming she couldn't afford the one she absolutely had to have. I had wired the money. No questions, no strings. She never said thank you. Now, somewhere in a corner of that garden, a torn satin hem likely lay discarded, unloved as the generosity that bought it. There was a knock at my door the following afternoon. I opened it to find Jonathan, tie loosened, jacket in hand, expression soft. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said. I needed to say something to the one person who told the truth and never asked to be heard." He paused, then added, "You were the only real part of that wedding." I let him speak. I didn't offer him comfort, but I offered something else. A nod. A truth of my own. Some things don't need an audience to be true. He left quietly. That I appreciated. That evening, I opened my laptop. Not to write a memoir, not to drag anyone online, just a few sentences in a blank document. This isn't a story about a broken glass. It's about the last time I let someone else define my worth. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But it was mine.